tearing itself apart with every step forward and every step back. We are in a divided house. That's what this topic tells us. And somewhere along the line in history, we heard that a house divided against itself cannot stand. It was said, and I quote, "I believe this government cannot endure permanently half slave and half free. I don't expect the union to be dissolved. I do not expect the house to fall. But I do expect that it will cease to be divided." End quote. This was said by Abraham Lincoln in 1858, on a very important date to us. It was actually on June 16th, 1858, that he said this. And as a person that studies history, it's not too often that I can turn around to anyone, and even myself, and say that Abraham Lincoln was wrong. He was wrong because he expected well-written legislative acts to be enough to change hearts and minds. He was wrong because he thought survival instincts, if not Christian values, would drive his nation to avoid mutual destruction and self-hatred. And he thought that would be enough to genuinely bring that nation together. The real national cohesion that serves as the heartbeat of a nation is not only felt during the 1995 Rugby World Cup or the 210 Soccer World Cup, but it pumps long after the final whistle has been blown. Abraham Lincoln was wrong because he could not imagine that for 160 years, one of the greatest democracies of this earth could live in a loveless marriage of immigrants. He could not imagine a partnership of colleagues who disrespected each other to such an extent, yet they mutually uphold and protect their individual and collective rights to misgovern without accountability in the name of political self-interest. He was wrong. He believed that economic exclusion would naturally evaporate without a concerted effort to reestablish the position of those that have been disenfranchised. This is what we've recently referred to in our own body politics as monopolistic capital. Monopolistic capital that requires no further adjective, as it is an understanding and an experience that exists in many forms all over the world. And as I talk about the painful crimes of a country like America that lacks social cohesion and nation building, I pray over a century and a half of history that should have changed with emancipation. And I raise this because we are a country that can follow that path. We can politely tolerate each other. We can talk about how proud we are to be South Africans. And we could talk about the beauty of a rainbow nation, but we really don't see each other. We really don't understand and appreciate each other's intrinsic value. We can follow a path in which we pay lip service to one of our own cardinal values, a value recognized all over the world as being uniquely African in its description of humanity. Ubuntu. I am because you are. It means that the needs of an individual are being driven and are being tied to the humanity of the next individual. I close by reminding us that Archbishop Desmond Tutu explained it in this way. One of the sayings in our country is, Ubuntu is essential to being human. It speaks particularly about the fact that you cannot exist as a human being in isolation. It speaks about our interconnectedness. We think of ourselves far too frequently as just individuals, separated from one another, where else you are connected and what you do affects the whole world. When you do well, it spreads. It is the whole of humanity. We came up with the words, we came up with the phrases, and yet 23 years after democracy, we're asking ourselves about where we are with nation building and social cohesion and what should be done about it. And so today, we will be talking amongst ourselves in dialogue about what needs to happen in order to change that. I just wanted to give you a small window of what could happen for 160 years if we don't change the current course and the trajectory that we're on. And if we don't realize that our failure to recognize and appreciate our individual value that's all encompassed in nation building and social cohesion will cost this country greatly, economically, socially, and even in terms of our world standing. I would like to just conclude my portion of this by saying that the idea of the dialogue is that democracy works, but only if you do. Democracy requires individual, active participants that bring their own special gifts of social cohesion and the upliftment of humanity to the table, and challenges the person next to you and the person sitting across from you and your neighbor and even your schoolmates to engage and look at themselves through your own eyes differently and make this country a better place. I wish all of us the best of fortune in our discussions today, and bless the proceedings that will take place from this point on. I'd like to hand over to my colleague, Prof. Barney Pichani, to take us through a brief introduction and background on the NFDI. Thank you.
Namhle, thank you very much. Thank you, Mbulelo. Welcome once again, ladies and gentlemen. It's very good to be here. It's good to see all of you in this place at this time. And my job is to introduce the concept of dialogues and the National Foundation's Dialogues Initiative. This is, in fact, the second, or the first outside of Johannesburg, the first session of the National Dialogues Initiative. The first one we had in Johannesburg in May, and this is the second one. We do intend to take this caravan around all the provinces, and we expect that each province will develop its own caravans to go around the province and along the districts. One of the first phrases that we find in our Constitution is one which I want to base much of my talk today. It says, "We, the people of South Africa." We, the people of South Africa. It's actually a very, very important phrase. because it claims something fundamental about who we are. It asserts very firmly the question of our identity. It commits us and connects us to South Africa totally and alike. We, the people of South Africa, is a phrase that I think ought to be ringing in our minds and in our ears all the time, and make that claim that is so important. We, the people of South Africa. I can say, I think, very firmly and confidently that for a generation like ours, and maybe others, it's even more important, because we, the people of South Africa, is, if you like, an expression of our dreams. Not as a dream that is about to happen, but also equally as a realization of our dreams. We, the people of South Africa, is an expression of our dreams. It is for some like us, because as long as I remember in my upbringing, always we had this idea of a South Africa that can actually become a place of our dreams, that can become a better place than it was, that all the divisions that were part and parcel of our social and economic and political system would go away, and that there would indeed be equality of all the people of South Africa, and there would be prosperity for all, and all of us would alike claim our common humanity. Now, that actually, for many of us, you'll find that is what brought us into the struggle for liberation. Because without that, we could just have sat back and allowed everything to happen, but we didn't. We didn't because we actually realized there was something better than what we had. I saw Villa Busak here, and I remember Alan saying, those days, what is important is that we know that what we have is not the best that God intends. And that actually there is more that we are, if you like, about to become. That is God's will. We, the people of South Africa, then, what makes us South Africans is that we can see the possibility of otherness, and that things can actually be better and different from what they are. Now, 1994, I'm not one of those people who think that 1994 was some miraculous event, or the Constitution itself was a compromise, that in fact it was possible to have a Constitution that is different than what we have. I actually do believe that this is the best that we have. And like Nelson Mandela, I also believe that by its nature, the Constitution is not a set monument that will never change, but actually each time you look at it every day, you review it, you experience it, you practice it, you see what is there, it gets better with age. And so I think that we are in the business of constantly constructing this Constitution and making it better by the day. Many years ago, when I was at school as a 15-year-old, there was a very famous Methodist preacher whose name was Seth Mokitimi. There may not be many who remember Seth Mokitimi here. A very famous Methodist preacher, very well-known, very fiery preacher was Seth Mokitimi. To this impressionable young boy at school, and he came to preach. He was at Hilltown those days. And he told a story that is very much in my mind. I tell it This is not the first time I tell it, but I want to tell it again. He said, one day there was a man who was visiting a small village in Europe. And he came to a quarry and found 3 people working on the stones in the quarry, the kind of quarry that Nelson Mandela was working in. He came to the first man and said, "What are you doing?" And the man said to him, "I'm breaking stones, can't you see? I'm breaking stones, can't you see?" And then he went to the second man and said, "What are you doing?" The man said, "I'm earning a living. Don't you know? I'm earning a living." And then he went to the third guy who was breaking stones and said to the man, "What are you doing?" And the man said, "I am building a cathedral. I am building a cathedral." Mokotimi was saying, in a sense, all 3 statements were correct. But of the 3 statements, the one that really had vision, that looked beyond the stones and the cutting and the drudgery and the hard work and the pain and the sunshine that was beating on them as they were in the quarry, was the ultimate destiny of that little stone. But he was also saying something different, that this magnificent cathedral that is going to be standing as a pride of place in our community actually has an imprint of me somewhere in it. So I have a little contribution in that big thing that is going to be there. And finally, that little contribution of mine will be there forever. It's going nowhere. And so in many ways, if we have that in mind, all of us, that little by little, we continually make our little contributions that will have pride of place in the construction of this magnificent vision that we actually have. I remember that always, because I say to myself, there is nothing that we do that is ultimately without purpose. There's nothing that we do that is ultimately without purpose. And for us, ultimately, even as we go through what we are going through at this time, even as we know that day by day, story by story, media by media, we are drifting away from the original vision that we had of our Constitution. And that is a fact. Even as we are told by the Statistician General that the levels of poverty today in our country are increasing by the day, much more than they were in 2011, for example. Even as we know that as we speak, 17 million South Africans are beneficiaries of a social grants system. That if, as a minister seems bent to do or nonchalant about, you take those grants away for one time, 17 million South Africans will have nothing to eat. Nothing. And a large number of South Africans actually live on less than 992 rand a month. So the thing that strikes you about South Africa, and so it should, isn't the grandeur and the beauty and the buildings and all the things that we see and the achievements that we make, not of our Constitution, not of our Parliament, not of our buildings, not of our beautiful roads that many people who come here see. The thing that should strike us is a man and woman who stands at the corner and with a board begging for food. Nelson Mandela said that when he retired, he was going to stand on a corner, street corner, and carry a board, and said, "I'm a pensioner with a young wife, with no children. Please give something." It's an idiom that South Africans understand, because that is the life of people, a growing number of South Africans. And in a very strange sense, with everyone that we actually see on our street corners, there are many others that we do not see who actually disappear into nothingness and die, and suffer and die. So that is nothing that we should be proud of. We ought not, under any circumstances, to be proud of the great divide that poverty causes in our country. It should, if you like, give us sleepless nights. Even as we know particularly that that divide of poverty is accentuated among the black people, among women, and especially in the lower strata, among rural South Africans. Even as we know that that divide is accentuated among certain categories, the face of poverty is black and female. Even as we know that a growing number of the children in our country, in those circumstances, have no future to dream about. I started off by saying that we dreamt of a South Africa that we were prepared and determined to work towards achieving. But in a very real sense, we are that South Africa. We are that South Africa today. And that's a thought that we must remember. We are that South Africa that we did dream about. So really, in many ways, we need to say to ourselves, come on, wake up. We can't keep dreaming. Because we are the South Africa that we've been dreaming about. And our job is to work to realize that South Africa here and now. Now, I'm one of those who don't believe that South Africa is a poor country. As a country, we are not poor. As a country, we are rich. As a country, we are rich in the diversities of people that we have, in the cultures and languages that we have. This makes this South Africa a very unique country. It makes us a very privileged people. That in fact, we are the world in one country. That is not anything that we need bemoan. It's something that we should celebrate. And that makes us such a wonderful and special people. We are the world in one country. We are a country of many languages and cultures and religions and colors if we have, but we are that one South Africa. The second thing that I think we celebrate is that we're a nation of riches. We're not a poor country economically. We're a nation of riches in land and in agriculture, in minerals, in science and technology. We are a country that has been endowed with a great deal of riches, natural endowments that God has given this nation. We're a nation of people who are energetic and industrious, and we have brought this nation into being out of our own industry and our determination to work to achieve it and work hard. And because we are people who have created out of this land that which it can become. And so a nation of enormous riches. So we are not a nation that ought to be felt sorry for by development agencies and whoever they may be out there. What we have become, sadly, I think Bulelo was quite right, what we have become, we have forgotten that first phrase of our Constitution, we, the people of South Africa. We have failed to recognize that we are the people of South Africa. And if we are the people of South Africa, then we must take responsibility. We must actually take responsibility for our democracy, how it works. We must take responsibility for the wealth of our land and how it is divided. We must take responsibility for the wealth of our nation and how it is shared. We must take responsibility for each other and all that who are in need in our midst. who must take responsibility for the prosperity of our nation. The problem is, and this is why we need dialogues, the problem is that since 1994, many of us, we have tended to look to the politicians and others to be the ones who actually drive our future for us. And that's what Mbulelo was saying when he said we have outsourced our responsibilities. And indeed, that was perfectly understandable. But now, 23 or so years later, we need to pause and to think again. We need to pause and think again and see how is it that we see the future of this country and take responsibility for it from now onwards. The idea then of national dialogues comes out of that. It is about enabling, empowering our people themselves to construct their present and their future. When you construct and build our present and our future again, we share among ourselves from our various intelligence and experiences that we have and recognize that each and every one of us has a value and importance from whom we must listen, from whom we must hear, and in turn we must hear as well, and together we build something that is magnificent. National dialogues, then, are not a function only of saying, it's broken, how do we fix it? They are a function of recognizing each other's humanity. It is because we recognize each other's and one another's humanity that we feel that it is time that we actually hear and listen to one another. National dialogue, then, is bringing and making democracy work. We need to make our democracy work because, by all accounts, our democracy is not working. Right now, at least I suspect I'm not the only one. I'm not even sure that we have a government. I think we've got a nation that is on free fall at the moment. I'm not even sure we have a government. I think we've got ministers. Just about every minister is running for government and is going to be the president, and they are addressing this meeting and that meeting, and the people are poor, there's no services, there's nothing. So for all intents and purposes, you better wake up. We have no government at the moment. And from time to time, you have a minister who stands before cameras and becomes a talking head. But actually, beyond that, we really have nothing. And that is happening because actually democracy does not work. So that's the first thing that we have learned in our 5 years. For democracy to work, we need to wake up. Not only after 5 years when there's elections, we are alert and wake up every day in order to make our democracy work. So we need to make that democracy work. We need this democracy to make sure that those who are in government, as our Constitution says, are accountable, responsive, and government is an open government that is accountable to us, the electors. In order for that to happen, we need to hear one another and to draw from the knowledge and the intelligence that all of us actually have. Now, as an early warning system, because sometimes if we don't listen to one another in this way, there is a real danger that before we know what is happening, people will be falling out of the democracy train and find other means of living and existing. I sometimes feel like that today. I feel when every day I open the radio, listen to the news, I find that the Chief Justice's office has had computers taken, National Prosecution Authority has got computers taken, the intelligence offices has had computers taken, and I say, wait a minute, what is going on here? And somehow these things actually happen right under our noses. And it's as if, everything is just falling apart. And that, I think, is what is happening because they're really, quite honestly, right now, we have a problem. we have a problem. I'm not even talking about the Guptas and all that, you know. Even on the mundane, small things, we have a problem. And I don't think, if I may tell you, I don't think there will be less of a problem after December 2017. I've heard many people say, oh, no, we're waiting for December 2017, we'll have a new president. I actually don't think it will make any difference. If anything, it might make things worse. We really do need to grab back the initiative of our country. That is the reason why we need to keep talking, we need to get South Africa talking. The idea of national dialogues, which is a collaboration of foundations, is to really not to prescribe, but to get South Africa talking, because the solutions are not found in some clever people and researchers and academics. The solutions are to be found when people come together, they find solutions to the problems of our country. Not as individuals, not as individual researchers, not as bishops and ministers and people of that nature, but actually when people come together, they find solutions. We need solutions, and our job is not to prescribe and say this is what we should be doing. Our job is to facilitate and make it possible for us to come together. We have no desire to establish a permanent structure of babying and nannying South Africa in this way. We are just setting a tone to enable South Africans to find solutions and create those things. And this, we'd like to think, should get South Africa a buzz. Only when we do that will we make more intelligent choices politically, more intelligent choices about who represents us in political and economic and other life, more intelligent choices about the direction of our country, more intelligent choices about how we extract accountability for those who are our public representatives. We need a change of mind from the trust that we gave to our leaders in 1994. We need to have, if you like, Villa, a hermeneutic of suspicion. We make our leaders work better when we suspect them a little bit that they do not intend what they say. And quite honestly, we have worked so hard at trusting our leaders, and I don't think, by and large, they deserve that trust. And so the National Foundation's Dialogue Initiative is there as an initiative that we think will be all over our country, will be setting our country abuzz, and politicians and others will begin to take notice. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Barney. A very thought-provoking thoughts. Thank you very much for that background. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm with Mbulelo and Theo Kemp, the three
Welcome back, and that was Professor Barney Pityana there giving an overview of the National Foundation's Dialogues Initiative, talking obviously about the importance of democracy and the importance of a citizenry that is active in that democracy. But Professor Pityana there saying that it is always good when the citizenship of a country is a little bit suspicious of what those that hold public office do. He was also expressing his concern there, saying how deeply concerned he is by some of the issues that that have taken place in the country over the next few over the last past months, talking for instance about the break-ins at the office of the Chief Justice, the office in Parliament, also mentioning of course the issue of the Guptas and saying how that is just part of a big problem that we are facing in South Africa, and that it will only be fixed once the citizenry of South Africa take charge of the democracy, and that events such as the National Foundation's Dialogue Initiative are quite important in fostering that communication amongst the South African people on what it is and what type of country that it is that they want to build for themselves. So for the next few while, we are going to receive some presentations from community-based organizations, from faith-based organizations, as well as business and youth organizations that will be taking place over the next while. We don't think that we'll be joining those, though, because for the time being, from us here in Tamboerskloof in Cape Town, we are going to say goodbye, and then we hope to see you again later on this afternoon.